The Carolina Panthers just did what the entire NFL prayed would never happen again. Last year, everyone wrote them off as a joke. 5 wins total, a defense that leaked 534 points like it was nothing. The worst unit anyone could remember. Fast forward one season, and they're standing in their own building hosting a playoff game, trading punches with a 12-win Los Angeles Rams squad until the final seconds of a 34-31 heartstopper. That isn't luck. That isn't cute. That's a team flipping the script on the whole conference in real time, and the rest of the NFC is starting to feel the chill. They stopped treating Bryce Young like some science project and finally built around him the way a franchise quarterback deserves. They locked down the inside with Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis. Gave him a true vertical threat in Tedairoa McMillan, then turned the run game into something serious with Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dowdle pounding the rock so Bryce Young didn't have to air it out 40 times just to stay alive. The numbers tell part of it. Over 3,100 passing yards, 23 touchdowns against 11 picks. But the real proof shows up in the clutch. 5 fourth-quarter comebacks, 5 game-winning drives, 7-3 in one-score games. He walked into huddles late with the season on the line, calm, eyes steady, and the sideline looked at him like the answer instead of the question. And while the offense finally clicked, the defense went from nightmare to nightmare for everyone else. They slashed points allowed from 31.4 a game down to 22.4, got Derek Brown healthy in the middle to clog lanes, and suddenly games stopped turning into shootouts. Opponents had to earn every inch, every red zone trip felt like war. The scary thing is this whole rise happened with only 8 wins. If the Panthers pulled this off while still finishing under 500, what happens when they actually take the next step? The answer starts with the guy who dragged his name out of the bus conversation and turned into something cold-blooded when the lights got bright. The real shift nobody saw coming was how Bryce Young started owning the moments that used to break lesser quarterbacks. Early on, people questioned if he could even handle the heat, but he turned doubt into fuel. When the pocket collapsed and the clock ticked down, he stopped chasing miracles and started picking apart what defenses gave him. Checkdowns became weapons, not escapes. He scrambled for easy first when they forgot he had legs, then hit the open man the second they respected the run. That quiet confidence changed everything. The sideline stopped holding their breath. They started believing. Look closer at what he actually delivered when games shrank to the final minutes. 5 fourth-quarter comebacks, 5 game-winning drives, a 7-3 mark in one-score finishes that carried Carolina through chaos nobody else could survive. Against the Los Angeles Rams in the wild card, he piled up over 260 passing yards, scored on the ground himself, and kept trading blows with a team built for deep runs. He didn't just hang around. He pushed them to the edge until the very last play. For a guy who once sat on the bench while the world debated his future, stepping up like that in playoff noise rewrote the narrative overnight. The league has to face it now. Was this a one-time spark, or the floor for what Bryce Young becomes every time pressure mounts? If this version shows up year after year, Carolina has the steady pulse that keeps contenders alive season after season. But no quarterback carries a team alone, no matter how clutch. The reason those big throws turned into wins was the defense finally showing up to match his fire. That side of the ball flipped faster than anyone thought possible, and the story of how they went from giving up everything to forcing opponents into misery is where this rise gets truly dangerous. The Panthers didn't just patch holes on offense, they rebuilt the whole machine from the ground up so it actually worked together. The biggest quiet change was making the run game matter again instead of treating it like an afterthought. Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dowdle started hammering between the tackles, wearing down fronts, controlling the clock, and giving the defense something to think about every snap. Defenses couldn't pin their ears back and rush Bryce Young non-stop anymore. Those carries opened up play action, stretched the field horizontally, and turned short gains into chain movers that kept drives alive. It wasn't flashy, but it was smart, and it finally let the passing game breathe. Up front, they made the pocket real. Robert Hunt and Damian Lewis anchored the interior. stonewalling bull rushes and creating clean pockets where Bryce Young could step up without getting buried. That protection wasn't perfect every play, but it was consistent enough to change how the offense attacked. Then they added Tetairoa McMillan, a big-bodied target who could stretch the field vertically and win contested catches that forced safeties to respect the deep middle. Suddenly, defenses had to pick their poison, crowd the box and risk getting burned over the top, or play off and watch the run game eat them alive. The balance wasn't accidental. It was deliberate design that took pressure off one guy and spread it across 11. All these pieces clicking together turned a unit that used to panic into one that dictated tempo. Drives lasted longer, third downs converted at a higher clip, and games stopped feeling like survival tests. But the offense only looked this sharp because the other side of the ball stopped bleeding points and started creating the kind of field position that let everything flow. That defensive turnaround didn't come from one magic fix. It came from a total mindset reset that made opponents hate every minute they spent on the field against Carolina. The Panthers' defense used to be the punchline every Sunday morning. Opponents walked in, knowing points were coming easy. Yards piled up without much fight, and the scoreboard kept climbing until the game felt decided by halftime. Then something snapped inside that unit. They quit trying to outscore problems and started choking them out instead. The whole approach flipped to physical, patient, and mean. Every snap became a battle of wills where the other team had to pay for every inch. No more free releases off the line, no more wide open lanes inside. They made football ugly for whoever lined up across from them, and that ugliness started winning games. Derek Brown coming back healthy changed the feel up front right away. He planted himself in the A-gaps and made running backs earn every carry the hard way, clogging what used to be running highways. The rotation pieces around him, guys like Turk Wharton, Bobby Brown, and Pat Jones, kept the energy high without dropping off. Fresh legs every series meant the push never quit, even late in quarters when other defenses used to fold. Points allowed crashed from 31.4 per game to 22.4. Rushing yards that once embarrassed them turned into grudging 3-yard gains. Red zone trips became torture sessions where offenses settled for field goals or turned the ball over trying to force something. The identity wasn't about flashy sacks or picks every drive. It was about wearing teams down until they cracked first. Those low-scoring grinds defined the season more than any blowout. Games ending 23-20, 13-6, 30-27 weren't flukes. They were proof this group could drag opponents into the mud and then finish them in the fourth. Momentum swings started coming from stops that felt earned, not gifted. One play in particular lit the fuse for everyone paying attention. That shift turned a defense people laughed at into one that quietly wrecked plans week after week. And the players who made those game-flipping stops deserve the spotlight now, because the back end started delivering the kind of plays that sealed the deal and showed this wasn't just smoke. The Panthers season kicked off looking like the same old nightmare nobody wanted to watch again. Week 1 road trip to Jacksonville ended ugly. 3 turnovers from Bryce Young, a 26-10 loss that felt like deja vu. Then Arizona came next. Giveaways on the opening 2 drives, another slide into the dirt, 0 and 2 before most teams even unpacked their bags. The whispers got louder. The rebuild talk turned vicious. Everything pointed to another long year of excuses. But one home game cracked the whole thing open. Week 3 against Atlanta and Charlotte flipped the switch nobody expected. They shut the Falcons out 30-0. Might their first shutout in years, won the turnover battle clean and sent the stadium home buzzing like the old days. That afternoon wasn't just a win. It was a statement that the old Carolina weakness wasn't coming back. The following week, New England reminded them the road still had teeth. 42-13 blowout, dropping the record to 1-3. But the damage was done. The team refused to fold. Miami rolled into town and built a 17-point lead late in the second quarter against an offense that could score at will. Instead of crumbling, Carolina leaned on the run. Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dowdle kept pounding. Bryce Young found rhythm, and they clawed all the way back for a 27-24 steal that tied the biggest comeback in franchise history. 3 straight wins followed, pushing them to 4-3. It's suddenly feeling dangerous instead of doomed. The finish line turned chaotic. They shocked the Los Angeles Rams on the road late in the year, Tetaroa McMillan burning deep for a fourth-quarter score, Mike Jackson picking off Matthew Stafford to swing momentum. Week 18 left the NFC South knotted at 8-9 with Tampa Bay and Atlanta, but Carolina owned the tiebreaker and grabbed the division crown despite the worst point differential in the playoff field. Hosting that wildcard game against the Rams pushed them to 34-31 in a shootout nobody predicted. They weren't just showing up, they were proving they belonged in January fights. Those moments built the belief, but the defense still had soft spots showing on tape that kept the ceiling from being sky high yet. The middle of the field needed fixing most, and how the front office attacks that hole could decide if this rise turns permanent or stalls out. The edges of this Panthers secondary quietly became one of the toughest spots to attack in the conference. J.C. Horn finally stayed healthy through a full season, locked down his side like the top 10 pick he was supposed to be, earned Pro Bowl nods, and justified the massive multi-year contract worth around $100 million that keeps him in Charlotte long-term. Across from him, Mike Jackson showed up after a quiet trade and turned into something nobody anticipated. He started every single game, played close to 99% of defensive snaps, took the hardest matchups week in and week out, and graded among the top 3 corners league-wide in coverage according to the advanced metrics. He wasn't just filling a role. He was winning those roles outright on a 2-year $10.5 million deal that now looks like highway robbery for Carolina. Mike Jackson forced turnovers at the worst possible times for opponents. That interception he jumped against Matthew Stafford in the regular season clash with the Los Angeles Rams flipped the entire game, sparked a comeback, and made people double take on what this secondary could do. J.C. Horn matched that fire with shutdown stretches of his own, blanketing top receivers and giving the pass rush extra time to work. The depth behind them added real layers too. Chow Smith-Wade and Corey Thornton brought competitive snaps from the slot, showing toughness in traffic, while veterans Dane Jackson and Damari Mathis provided steady insurance when bodies got banged up. This group didn't rely on one star carrying the load. They built a rotation that stayed fresh and aggressive, turning what used to be a weak link into a strength that opponents had to game plan around. The front office now faces the kind of problem most teams dream about. Mike Jackson heads into the final year of his bargain contract after proving he's playing at number 1 corner money. Dan Morgan and Brant Tillis have to decide whether to let him walk after another strong year or lock him up now with a deal that reflects the tape. Get it right, and Carolina rolls with J.C. Horn and Mike Jackson as a lockdown tandem that could anchor the defense for years. Hesitate, and a proven piece slips away just as the unit starts gelling into something special. That choice matters because the middle of the defense still has questions hanging over it. And fixing those gaps could complete the picture or leave cracks right where contenders exploit them most. The heart of the Panthers defense used to define what this franchise stood for. Guys cleaning up messes, setting the tone, making tackles that echoed through the building. Lately, that middle has felt like the one spot still lagging behind the progress everywhere else. The front 7 pushes hard, the secondary jumps routes and flips games. But too often tight ends slip free on crossing routes or running backs find cutback lanes after the initial contact. Those breakdowns show up on third downs and in the red zone more than they should, turning good stops into frustrating conversions. The talent around the edges is gelling fast, but without a stronger presence inside, the whole unit stays one step short of elite. Right now, the room mixes promise with real question marks. Trevin Wallace brings the sideline-to-sideline range and burst that excites scouts, but shoulder injuries have sidelined him for chunks of the last 2 seasons and left doubts about whether he can hold up for 16 games straight. Christian Rozeboom stepped in as a reliable every-down player, racked up over 120 tackles, and became the voice that kept everyone locked in. Yet athletic tight ends isolated him in space and exposed coverage limitations that popped up too often. Depth pieces like Claudin Cherlouse fight hard in limited snaps and show flashes of physicality, but the group as a whole needs a centerpiece to elevate the standard back to where Carolina fans remember it being automatic. Dan Morgan, Brant Tillis, Dave Canales. and Ejiro Evero have a clear path if they want to close that gap this offseason. In free agency, someone like Devin Lloyd could walk in and transform the position overnight with his 89.1 defensive grade, lockdown run defense, and 81.1 coverage mark that plugs exactly what Carolina has been missing. Or they could swing early in the draft, maybe at pick 19, on a true difference maker such as Sonny Styles, Anthony Hill, CJ Allen, Jake Golday, or Josiah Trotter to pair with Trevin Wallace and slide Christian Roseboom and Claudin Chirelis into supporting roles where they thrive. Nail that addition and the spine of this defense suddenly matches the talent on the line and in the secondary. Get it wrong, and the same soft spots keep showing up against smart offenses. That final piece in the middle ties directly to the back end, where stability at safety could lock everything down or leave one more vulnerability for opponents to target. The last layer sitting behind everything else is the safety spot, where Carolina has solid pieces in place but still needs to decide how much trust to put in them long term. Trevon Moehrig already carries starter money and brings the range and instincts that let the corners play aggressive without worrying about the deep middle getting burned. Lathan Ransom has flashed enough toughness and ball skills in limited looks to suggest he could grow into a full-time starter next to Trevon Moehrig, handling the box better than most expect from a guy still finding his rhythm. The question isn't whether they have talent back there. It's whether the current duo can carry the load through a full grind of a season, or if one more veteran presence makes the difference in tight games when communication has to be perfect. A small upgrade or depth addition could turn good coverage into lockdown reliability that opponents can't exploit late. With the core already locked in, this Panthers roster sits in a spot most teams would kill for after just 8 wins. Bryce Young proved he can lead in chaos. Derek Brown anchors the front like few others. Mike Jackson and J.C. Horn give them a secondary edge that scares passing attacks. The pieces fit. The culture shifted. The win started coming even when the record didn't look pretty. Dan Morgan, Brant Tillis, Dave Canales, and Ejiro Evero now hold the keys to push past the surprise phase into something sustained. Strengthen the linebacker room, settle the safety picture with smart moves, reward the guys who carried the load through the turnaround, and the ceiling jumps to double-digit victories and home playoff games that feel expected instead of shocking. Miss on those spots and the momentum stalls right when it could explode. The NFC South circus might have handed them the division this time on tiebreakers. But the real story is what happens when Carolina stops sneaking in and starts dictating terms. Other contenders already circle weeks against them differently. The tape shows a team built to hang with anyone when the matchups get physical and the stakes rise. If the front office stays aggressive and trusts what they've started instead of chasing distractions, the Panthers don't just become relevant. They become the matchup nobody wants in January. The rise isn't over. It's just getting started, and the league better pay attention before it turns into something unstoppable.